This week on Technicolor Blood, we will discuss Panos Cosmatos' new film, Mandy, starring Nicolas Cage, some news surrounding Henry Cavill, and Venom finally gets a rating.
We're also going to go over the box office standings for Avengers: Infinity War.
Technicolor Blood, Episode 6, starts right now. Technicolor Blood, here we go. Terrence, we separately saw Mandy this weekend. We will discuss that soon. So everyone out there listening, prepare yourself for that because that was quite an experience in and of itself. But let's, as always, start with some news. I think the biggest movie news of the week undoubtedly is the story/rumor that Henry Cavill may actually be out as Superman for the DC film universe.
Yeah, and I think that's big news because, I mean, he's Superman. He's the linchpin of that entire film franchise, and having to replace him, I mean, probably means rebooting the entire franchise to some degree.
Probably so, and of course, we've discussed DC on the show many times before and some of the confusing decisions made, and I think we probably agree that, you know, Henry Cavill is one of the things that the Superman movies have going for them.
Oh yeah, one of the few things that actually work. Actually, the entire cast of those Superman movies is pretty strong.
Yeah, they're really fine on that. I appreciate the fact that they may be considering a refresh or a reboot or do something different. DC desperately needs to do that, as we've discussed before. But they've got a solid, establishing leading man type who's actually pretty good at the role, ready to go, and they want to throw that out in spite of the rest of the film universe.
And, you know, he's kind of peaking in his career right now. You know, he's was just recently probably the main antagonist in the Mission Impossible films.
Right.
You know, he's got some things going for him.
Yeah, I don't really understand the thinking there. Of course, more detail I'm sure will emerge about it. And the story I read, they seem to suggest that at least partially this was due to the fact that they were trying to arrange a cameo for him in the upcoming Shazam movie, and the talks fell apart for whatever reason. I really don't see why one of those things has to do with the other at all.
Yeah, why would a cameo in any way, shape, or form affect such a momentous part of your film strategy for the next several years?
The meeting that they're talking about would have to be so tremendously fracturing and negative as to ruin a franchise. I just can't imagine that's the case. So I think this is one of those things where, as time goes on, we'll get a little bit more detail. And I don't think it's a slam dunk either. There's still people out there saying, whoa, this is not actually a done deal.
Oh, yeah. So almost immediately after the internet was filled with that news, Henry Cavill's agent came out and said, no decisions have been made. You know, nobody freak out. And then, of course, Warner Brothers themselves released a statement saying, we've had no discussions about the future of Superman at all. So nothing that you're hearing is true. And then on top of that, Henry Cavill, and this is probably the part that has kept this rumor alive as much as it has been. He released, I guess, an Instagram video where he doesn't say anything.
Right.
It's just him sitting in front of the camera, staring into the camera, and slowly lifting from the bottom frame a boxed Henry Cavill as Superman action figure.
Yeah.
And that's all you get. So,
and to me, that is the biggest hint so far that this is a non-story.
Right.
Because if there's an actual problem, the way that he presented that social media post is not at all in the realm of someone who's extremely pissed off about losing a role or something went wrong with their employer. That would just seem like a wink and a nod to me.
Right. If anything, like as soon as I saw that, my thought was, A, this is a contract negotiation, and B, this contract negotiation hinges on how much money he's getting for the merchandising that's coming from these films.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, the Superman movies are now box office wise, I'm not sure about how successful they are as far as the most successful of the DC movies, but I know for sure that Man of Steel is the one that has the best reputation. We're not big fans of it.
No.
But Man of Steel by a lot of folks is considered a really, really great movie. And I see that opinion a lot more than anything that, you know, that centers more around Batman, that's for sure, in the new universe.
Well, I'm not going to say anything about that because I think that is ludicrous to suggest that Man of Steel is anything more than just a steaming mistake.
It's a very, very popular movie with the big fans of the DC universe. Even the ones that can separate the fact that Justice League was terrible and Batman vs Superman was terrible. A lot of those folks that even can realize that still cling on to Man of Steel being a great movie. I don't see it. I'm not going to fight to the death with anyone about it, but it seems like it's almost like it's their base. The people that love Man of Steel and the people that love Henry Cavill is the DC base that they're hanging on to.
Well, good luck. That's all I can say.
All right, so another comic book movie universe news. Venom, apparently, is going to get a PG-13 rating. Now, this really doesn't surprise me, but I don't really know much about the Venom character. I don't know the comic. I know that when it was first announced that there was going to be a movie, apparently they had hyped it up as if it was going to be a hardcore take in an R-rated movie. Quickly, they backtracked on that, apparently, when the risk of maybe losing a future crossover with Marvel's very PG-13 universe, Tom Holland as Spider-Man, came up. So they thought maybe that would probably ruin the chance of them being. I guess Sony doesn't want to risk the chance of a crossover based on making the movie they actually want to make. So if they want to make an R-rated movie, they should make an R-rated movie. But it looks like to me that I've been told by people who are bigger fans of Venom than I am that you really can't encapsulate that character in a PG-13 movie.
Well, I'm calling BS on that.
All right.
He's encapsulated in comic books, and they're all PG.
Yeah.
Certainly the ones from Marvel are.
Yeah, I just, there's been a lot of, I don't know, differing opinions on the trailers upcoming. I know you and I have talked about it. We're big fans of Tom Hardy. It's probably the only reason why we're going to see the movie. But I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are upset about this. A lot of people are making comparisons to Deadpool, which obviously the R rating that's necessary for those is a completely different reason than they would need it for Venom. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a superhero movie. They want to maximize their box office. I get it. I don't really have a problem with it. But then again, I'm not super close to the character.
Listen, I love talking about this stuff. It's why we do a podcast. I certainly don't want to stop, but I'm just going to call it right now. This is a ridiculous PR stunt on the part of the studio. It's ludicrous to think for even a moment that they would greenlight a movie with a character from the Spider-Man comic books and not have all of this game planned out for 2 or 3 years down the line. They knew from long before they ever cast anyone or brought a director on whether or not he was going to cross over with Spider-Man, exactly when he would cross over with Spider-Man, if he was going to be tied into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And obviously, Sony still owns Spider-Man. He's in the Marvel universe because of this contract deal that they have with Marvel. The same thing is going to happen with Venom. There was never any chance that this was going to be an R-rated movie. I don't buy that for a moment.
So you think this is a calculated?
Yeah, absolutely.
Stunt? I mean, they did use it to sort of say, but there will be an unrated cut of the DVD, after the release of the film before it's even come out.
Yeah, well, sure. Already started marketing the DVD release sales because that's where like 50% of the profit now for studios lies.
Yeah, if I was a huge fan of Venom, the thing that would irritate me about the statement is the idea that they would let potential future movies affect the movie they want to make. That would supremely annoy me, which again is why it's probably bullshit.
I mean, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think that right now, if you're making a superhero movie, the first movie is just 1/3 of your entire calculation. You're constantly strategizing for the sequels and for the tie-ins and for the spin-offs. I mean, that's the model that's been set up. It's working perfectly for Marvel. So why would any Marvel character not fall in line? Yeah,
I mean, it's business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they cast a big name star who's not cheap. The movie's clearly full of special effects that are not cheap. I mean, all of that is baked into their strategies.
Yeah. All right. So another one I want to bring up real quick. This is not really something that we'll spend a lot of time on because I can't imagine there's a whole lot of people who are super interested in this, other than maybe myself. You may not even care about it, but directors Chris Nolan and Paul Thomas Anderson. If you don't know, Chris Nolan, the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception. Lots of huge movies. Dunkirk more recently. Paul Thomas Anderson, Boogie Nights, There Will Be Blood, more recently Inherent Vice, a couple other movies in there, big ones that I'm forgetting. The Master, I think he did with Phil Hoffman. They are teaming up apparently to, I don't know, it says here, have discussions with TV manufacturers. It sounds more like chastising TV manufacturers to get them to, eliminate or change some of the preset settings so that when consumers watch movies at home, they get the director's original vision. And when I read that, I thought to myself, well, this is just, pretentious director garbage. No one cares about this. And that's still true. No one does care about that. But then when I actually read the article, what they're talking about is that motion blur thing. And I think the only reference that most people would have to that, as far as a movie-going experience, would be the first Hobbit movie that was shot in that sort of weird motion blur. I don't even know how to describe it. People call it the soap opera effect. There's a lot of names for it.
Yeah, so they doubled the number of frames per second that you saw, and as a result of that, there was no motion blur in the film.
Right, and it's extremely disconcerting.
Right, so motion blur, for people who might not know, that's when you are watching a movie and you pause it, and if a person is walking across the screen, they're blurry. When you hit that pause, that's because the camera is capturing, obviously, a series of still images on film that are just then played back at the right speed so that it appears to be motion. As a result of that, those individual still photos, if something is moving in front of them, it's blurry because it's in motion when the camera snaps that still image. When you increase the frame rate, you're snapping those pictures faster and faster and faster. And as a result of that, you can get them quick enough that there is none of that blur at all. Yeah. And everything is perfectly stationary on those individual frames. When you play it back, there's zero motion blur. Yeah. And if you saw The Hobbit in theaters in that original frame rate, as Chris was saying, it looked a lot like watching a soap opera.
Yeah, and if you just explain what you just explained to someone who'd never experienced it before, I don't think in their brain they would understand. I don't think I would understand in my brain had I not seen the difference, how different it is. And then you see it. If you're interested and you have a more modern television, there's most certainly a motion blur setting on the television. Just go on your TV. I take no responsibility for anything you screw up in your TV. Turn on full blast.
Yeah, I think it's called
try it.
I think it's called motion smoothing.
I think it depends on the manufacturer, but yeah, there's different types of names for it. Like the motion smoothing and motion blur is the thing that the industry refers to it as. But the different TV settings, I don't know. Anyway, if you go in and turn it on full blast, because you can, like my TV has it on, you can do it in certain rates as well. It's actually good for sports, really. But just try it. Just go on your TV, mess with the settings, and then watch something for 2 minutes, and you'll probably get sick to your stomach. Anyway, the whole reason I brought this whole article up is if you do have the motion blur turned up on or motion smoothing turned up on your TV, and you watch movies like that, you probably need to seek professional attention because there is something wrong with you. I will side with Paul Thomas Anderson and Chris Nolan on this, that there is something wrong with you if you have your TV set to this and you need help. So listen to these guys when they say what they're saying. I know you're going to disagree. I know. But they're right. If you watch a movie with that stuff on, you're basically a criminal.
Listen, I agree 100% with what you're saying. It is wrong. It is terrible, and people should be punished for it. The problem is the ship has long sailed on this, right? This feature has been built into televisions for years now, and I have friends who think they love movies, who will talk to me about movies, who watch copious amounts of television, and when I go to their homes, they have this feature turned on their televisions, and I can't even look at it. It drives me crazy. I won't say any names, but you know who you are. And I remember when they first got their TVs, and I tried gently to say, you should turn that off. Yeah. It didn't happen. And now they love it. Like, I think if you watch enough of it, maybe you just stop seeing it. Maybe your brain adjusts. I don't know. But I agree it's wrong. And I guess if I was a real friend, I would just smash their television with a sledgehammer.
Yes, it induces vomiting. That's a good way to show them as well. You don't have to actually go into the settings. You could just start vomiting.
Okay. I'll take that under advisement.
It's almost happened to me. All right. Terrence, you love talking about box office. So
that's one of my things.
Why don't you speak a little bit on this story? It's not really a story. It's just sort of an interesting note about the recent box office changes domestically in America.
Well, you pretty much just covered it for me right there. So Avengers Infinity War has now wrapped up its domestic theatrical run in the box office. That means it's finished up with all the dollar theaters and that sort of thing. And it now sits at number 4 on the all-time highest grossing domestic box office chart. So number 1 is Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Number 2 is Avatar. 3, kind of surprisingly, I think for most people, is Black Panther. 4 is Infinity War. Number 5 is a little movie you've probably heard about, Titanic. So Infinity War jumped past Titanic and sits just below Black Panther. That's kind of intriguing because Black Panther and Infinity War came out in the same year. So that's 2 of the top 5 highest grossing domestic films ever that came out in the same year. Now, one caveat to this that we always like to bring up is that none of these numbers include amounts adjusted for inflation.
Right.
So, and Hollywood loves it that way, right? So right now, Jurassic World is number 6, but if you adjusted for inflation, I'm sure the original Jurassic Park would probably be far higher up the list than Jurassic World is. Hollywood doesn't want to do that because for them, it's a great marketing tool to be able to point out that these movies keep leapfrogging each other to become the highest grossing film of all time. Like that's like big title. It means a lot. So they want to see that action. They want to see that list constantly changing, but it's still worth noting because it is kind of a big deal. And like I said, for me, the really impressive thing is Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, same year. Kind of crazy.
Pretty good year.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and just as a bit of trivia, Terrence, you may already know the answer to this, but for those of you listening out there, adjusted for inflation, do you know what the number 1 movie grossing domestically in the history of movies is? I'm
going to take a stab in the dark. Gone with the Wind?
That is correct. It is still Gone with the Wind.
That's crazy.
Which I believe was released in 1939?
Yeah.
I mean, if that gives you any indication of what a shell game box office numbers are, that should be hit.
Yeah, that really drives it home right there. Okay, another little note that I think is worth mentioning, but we won't spend too much time on it, but we've spoken over the last couple of weeks a couple of times about Alfonso Cuarón's Roma. That's his Spanish language film that is coming out as part of a deal with Netflix. And Mexico has chosen it as their foreign language Oscar submission. So it's definitely got a shot at least one Oscar, genuinely. And we'll see when it gets released. I would not be surprised if it didn't get nominated for some of the big awards as well.
Sure.
So that's interesting notation. The other thing that's worth mentioning is Tom Hardy recently posted on Instagram a new Venom poster specifically for the IMAX release of the movie. And I realize this is a podcast, so you can't see the poster. So you might be wondering, why is he even mentioning this? And I just want to bring it up because I have kind of a pet peeve about movie posters right now, which is for way too long, they've all just been basically collages cobbled together in Photoshop and then a bunch of filters slapped on them. And I mean, that's fine, or was fine, obviously, when it became cheaper to just hire a Photoshop jockey to do the work instead of an actual artist to paint or create a artistic interpretation of the movie. But this new poster for the IMAX release of Venom, I mean, it's an actual piece of art. I mean, it looks very, very comic booky, very comic booky. And I mean, I just love it. I just think it's fantastic. It's interesting. It's different. I'm sure whatever is released for the actual mainstream theatrical release of the movie, that movie poster will be more in line with what we're used to seeing. But I mean, this was just a fun alternate take on what could be done with a movie poster. And I'd really love to see studios do this sort of thing more.
All right. Yeah, I didn't really think about it until you brought it up to me recently about how things have gone with movie posters. And then I started doing some searching online, and I mean, you're dead on. Like, it's just, there's just no more movie poster art out there anymore. So now when there is one that actually hits, it's almost jarring.
Yeah.
When you see one, because I think when we talked about it last a little bit extensively was when Solo came out, because you'd made a comment about how the poster looked like it was just a straight rip of a previous movie poster.
Yeah, of another artist's particular work. Yes.
Yeah, and that sort of led down the discussion to a longer one about movie posters, which, again, I mean, to us old school like fans of film, that's a big deal. Like, I love to see artists actually get to do their rendition of something that's not just, like you said, captured images that have already existed for the movie,
right?
Where there's something is actually coming straight from their brain onto the page or onto the poster. So.
And I think part of an example of how that's changed is, people used to love hanging movie posters on the wall, and people still do, but they're all old posters that were created by an artist. I don't think there are a whole lot of people who want to hang a modern movie poster where it's just
Yeah.
photos and stuff. Compare all those great classic James Bond movie posters that make those movies look absolutely amazing with like the current movie posters, which is just almost always a photo of Daniel Craig in front of a black background or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah, I mean, and really just to test this theory, if you're interested at all, just go onto Google Images and search, movie posters, or search a specific title recently for movie posters and see what they have that just comes up that was officially tied to the movie. And then go on to like a site like Etsy or something.
Yeah.
And do the same search.
sure, yeah.
And you'll find amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Just fan art. I actually have an Old Boy poster in this room that we're recording right now that is, I think, a stunning piece of fan art. And I mean, the actual poster is cool too, but I mean, there's just so much amazing stuff out there. And I can't believe that Hollywood hasn't figured out that they should be tapping that instead of just the same old, same old.
Yeah. And you know what? This might be an interesting discussion for Twitter. So if there's anyone who doesn't agree with what we're saying, then I would love to hear the counterpoint.
Yeah. If you're a Photoshop movie poster cobbler, let us know. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit coming up here about some development news, and then we're going to get into Mandy. So Jordan Peele has a new movie perhaps in development to follow up on his wildly successful Get Out. I want to say he had another project that was going on pretty strong for a while, and this is just, I think he might actually still be working on that currently. But apparently he's going to do a remake of sort of under the radar cult classic horror film Candyman. Did you ever see that, Terrence?
I did, yes.
Way back in the day.
Yeah, way back in the day.
It's the only thing I really remember about it is that it had a super creepy lead who had like a big hook for a hand,
right?
And it had sort of like the old Bloody Mary legend attached to it, where you say his name in the mirror or something. The only thing I really remember, I don't remember too much about the movie. There were a lot of bees, a lot of violence.
That's
obviously,
correct. Yeah, literal bees.
But we talked a couple of weeks ago about movie theater experiences in the theater. I saw Candyman in the theater with a good friend of mine long time ago, and I remember there was the scene in the movie where the Candyman, like the thing happens in the mirror, say his name, and then like the hook like bursts through the mirror at the person who's looking in the mirror, and my friend so quickly slumped in his seat that he fell out of it. Like he shifted his butt forward, and his momentum took him forward. He hit his knees on the seat in front of him, scared the shit out of the person in front of him, and literally came out of his seat.
Chain reaction.
Which I think was an early thing that got in my brain that makes me enjoy audience reactions to movies.
Sure, absolutely.
So anyway, I guess not a surprise that he's going back to the horror genre. I'm a little surprised that he's not doing something original again, because that's what was so refreshing. I think the best part of Get Out, which I thought was really good, but didn't quite meet up the hype when I saw it.
Right.
But the thing that I loved about it is it was wholly original.
Yes.
And at least the fact that it was, it wasn't based on a previous property.
Right.
It was just an original screenplay, and now apparently he's going to go back and do sort of either, I'm not sure if it's a sequel or I'm not sure if it's a reboot or a remake or what it is, but I guess you could say I'm a little disappointed that it's not something wholly original again.
I had the exact same response when I first read that, but then I started thinking about it a little bit more. And I remember that a lot of the marketing and hype around Candyman at the time was that was the first slasher film that was about a black serial killer or supernatural menace, whatever you classify those particular villains and slashers movies as. And so I could see how, he would have been just the right age for a kid who grew up a horror film and who was black to see that film and, it have a really, really profound impact on him. So I could kind of understand that if he's got that personal connection, that might be part of the reason why he wants to
absolutely
wants to remake it. But yeah, like you, I'm kind of like, again, there's an endless amount of going backwards. I would prefer that he just go forward.
Yeah. All right. So another little piece I wanted to bring up this week is kind of fun and stick with us here. I think you'll be entertained by this, even if you don't know who this is. There's a new documentary coming out soon about a director named Uwe Boll. He has a strange name, Uweboll. The name of the documentary is F.U. All, the Uwe Boll Story. It's about how Uwe Boll is one of the most hated men in Hollywood. The guy has shown a penchant in the past for being a bit of a PR whore. So my initial thought when I saw this was that he has something to do with it himself.
Right.
And he may. I was not able to confirm that because it's still very early. But just to give you a little bit of background on Uwe Boll, he's sort of infamous for making bad movies, specifically video game movies.
Yes.
Most famously, and I could be wrong, but I think his most famous one was Alone in the Dark, which was an adaptation of a video game that starred Christian Slater. I think I saw 15 minutes of it a long time ago, and it was every bit as terrible as I heard it was. He also did Blood Rain and a Blood Rain sequel. He did a movie called Postal. He actually did a sequel to Alone in the Dark, and he also did a film adaptation of the video game Far Cry, which is, I think, far more popular video game now than it was back then. I could be wrong about that as well.
I had no idea there had ever been an adaptation of it.
Yeah, it was way back in 2008,
wow.
Which I think might have been based on the original Far Cry. Right. There's so many of them now. So, and he's done a handful of other ones too, but he's got this reputation of being... Go ahead. Terrence has something to color on this.
Well, I just wanted to add that one of the movies, and I don't remember what it's called, but it famously, sort of in the glory days of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, he released kind of a cash grab that was a fantasy film based on
In the Name of the King.
In the Name of the King,
yes,
right?
I've forgotten about that one.
Yes, it stars Jason Statham.
It had like a cast with a lot of recognizable names.
Yes.
But oddly cast.
Yeah, so oddly cast. The best part of the casting is the king in this film, the King Arthur-ish role of this medieval English monarch was played by Burt Reynolds.
Yes. That's the one that I couldn't remember.
Oh my God.
Somehow that didn't make our retrospective on Burt Reynolds.
Yeah, that's a shame.
But it's funny too, because when I went back to just refamiliarize myself with Uwe Boll's full filmography, on the source that I was reading it from, they have a column for awards and nominations. And you can just sort of go down and see these are the type of awards he's won over the years. Stinker's Bad Movie Award for Best Director. Alone in the Dark, Blood Rain, Stinker's Bad Movie Award for Best Director, Name of the King, Golden Raspberry, Worst Director, Postal, Golden Raspberry, Worst Director. I'm just telling you the ones he won.
Oh my God.
He was nominated for far more of these. Anyway, historically, bad movies, bad attitude. Apparently his actors always hate him, which is really weird. Like a guy who's not good at all can't seem to have a good relationship with these actors that are in these movies that everyone universally pans.
Right.
So anyway, the other thing, the part of Uwe Boll that I thought it's probably I think it's the most notable thing about his career. Sometime at the height of the world's disdain for him, which I guess would have been in the mid-late 2000s.
Yeah. The time period for him is important, and I want to come back to that here in a minute.
Okay. Well, he famously challenged his critics to fight him.
Fight them.
Like literally a boxing match in a ring. I guess professionally overseen. I don't know. Clearly a bit of a PR stunt. So apparently he put it out there, and there was an overwhelming amount of people who were interested in actually taking part in this.
Right. So this is the early kind of days of internet film critic fandom, right, where the line between people who just had movie blogs and people who were legitimate film critics got blurred. Right. So you had all these guys who were film critics online, they realized this was a brilliant opportunity, that they could get in a fight with this director that they've been trashing on their little blogs and websites for years, and really, really, really get their name out there.
Yeah. The trouble is, Uwe Boll is a trained boxer.
Yeah. Nobody knew that.
Yeah. So he famously put it out there. There was an overwhelming amount of response, to the point where they had to go back and say, oh, whoa, okay, we need to establish some minimums here. You have to have had written at least 2 articles bashing him, either in print or on the web. Like, they literally had to narrow the scope.
Right.
So for the article, I knew about this way back when it happened, but it's been so long I had to refresh my memory. And the article I read said that he actually ended up fighting 5 different guys. And these guys were told that, this is part of PR, and that prior to the fight, there would be a professional there to give them a few pointers and tips, just so they don't look like they're complete clowns out there. That never happened. There was never a professional that talked them through anything. And so they got in the ring, and Uwe Boll legit went in and tried to kick the living shit out of these people and beat all 5 of them handily. I mean, that's not the zenith of sensitive, or being sensitive to your criticism. I can't imagine what is. Apparently, he also famously turned down a critic who was also a trained amateur boxer, never actually fought the guy, even though he was also a trained boxer. So he wasn't interested in fighting someone who actually had fighting experience. He just wanted to beat up, I guess, mom's basement type critics, and he did so.
And what a great story it is, too. I mean, it doesn't matter what he directs from this point forward. Nothing he does in the fictional world of filmmaking is ever going to be as great as what really happened in real life.
Yeah, and of course, my sincere hope is that there will be a large portion of this upcoming documentary devoted to that
Oh yeah,
boxing incident.
Has to be.
Yeah, so it's called it's called F You All, the Uwe Boll story. And I don't know as far as when it's coming out or if it's even finished yet. It's just sort of on my radar, and once that gets closer to actually getting I'm sure a straight to streaming release,
Right.
we'll inform you. I mean, it would be fitting for Uwe Boll. We'll inform you of that. So
speaking of streaming, so I got to thinking that the hatred that universally fans of movies have for Uwe Boll, it can kind of never happen again, because part of what made him so unique and special is that his movies were actually getting released in the theaters, right? Now, because of all the streaming outlets that there are, the demarcation between, bad B movies and then legitimate movies that are people trying to make a real film, that's so blurry now that there's, you could never have a Uwe Boll today. I mean, so many bad movies that people don't realize are bad because they pop up on their Netflix stream, like smashed between two great legitimate A-list movies,
right?
And people watch them and they're like, oh, that wasn't very good, and your jaw drops when they tell you that they even wasted 2 hours on it. You're like, well, of course it was not going to be good. You were never supposed to watch this movie.
Yep.
And so I it's kind of charming that we're getting this documentary that's not only a snapshot of Uwe Boll, but I feel like it's a snapshot of this like period in time where the internet allowed people to focus their rage, or maybe not rage, but focus their attention on really, really bad filmmaking in an effort to just shame or bring that filmmaker down. But now we're at the other end of that, where the internet has created this marketplace where people can no longer tell who those people are and which of those movies are just intentionally crappy on purpose, or the ones that are actually trying to be a good movie but are crappy by accident.
Yeah. It's like podcasts, man.
Yeah.
Any clowns can make a podcast.
Yeah, you don't have to know anything about what you're talking about.
That's right. You don't have to fight to get airtime on the radio. You just make a podcast. Say what the hell
you just have to have super sexy voices.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, Uwe Boll, maybe he missed his calling as a PR guy, because this just popped into my head. But speaking of how he did the whole PR thing with the boxing match and everything else, he actually very successfully, and I don't know if this was his idea or not, of course, but he very successfully used a very early, I guess, meme, or I should say viral video, to promote one of his movies called, I think it was the one that was called Postal, where this was after YouTube was created in, I think, 2005. The movie came out, Postal, I think, came out in 2008. But there was a black and white security footage video of a guy just going completely insane in an office setting. Coworkers all around. He like throws his computer and like is trashing shit, and his coworkers are all looking on in horror, and he's like on top of the tables and just destroying equipment. And it was so early on in the age of YouTube and viral videos that there were people legitimately like, is this real? Did this happen? Wow. And then, of course, later on you find out that it was just PR for this movie. But nowadays, immediately when you see anything like that, your first thought is this real?
Yes.
Back then it wasn't like that. Back then it was like, oh wow, okay. And then later on you find out,
right?
If it was reasonably well done. So he kind of a genius in that way.
Oh, that's pretty impressive. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah. The video now I'm sure would look comically like easy to point out as being fake, but at the time, before viral videos were a thing, it was kind of a shocking deal.
Yeah.
So
now it's kind of the opposite. Now it's shocking to me when somebody points out a viral video or an interactive website for an upcoming movie, and they're like, "Oh, did you see what happened?" or whatever. I'm just like, aren't we past that point?
Not as long as the internet stands. No. All right, so just wanted to get that out there. We'll definitely update you on that as more news comes about it. I'm sure it'll just be like a straight to Netflix kind of thing, a couple of months or a couple of years down the line. We'll find out. All right, so in our next segment, we're finally going to tackle the new Panos Cosmatos movie, Mandy. We have been looking forward to this one for a while after talking about the trailer several weeks ago. And this is Panos Cosmatos. He is actually the son of the guy of George Cosmatos, who directed Tombstone way back in the day. Just interesting, useless trivia for you. This movie stars Nicolas Cage in a role that I don't think we've seen him in quite a long time, or maybe ever. He had a lot to chew on this movie.
Yeah, he makes it his own.
Yes. So since this movie just came out, we want to be sensitive to spoilers. So what we're going to do here, a little bit different than our normal reviews, is we're going to speak generally about the film just very briefly, and then we're going to go into sort of a spoilers segment, or a segment that will include spoilers. And if, since you're listening now, you can go down to the description of the episode, and I'll tell you the time code of the episode where the spoiler segment starts and ends. So we're just going to try that this time and see how it goes. So Mandy, I was very excited about this. The trailer looked absolutely incredible, like nothing I've ever seen before. Panos Cosmatos obviously proved that he's got a visionary eye with Beyond the Black Rainbow from 2010. I guess I'll just toss it to you first to give your overall thoughts on the movie. I'll give mine, and then we'll get into the more spoilery stuff.
Okay, so I really enjoyed the film overall. I didn't love it because at the end of the day, it's a pretty basic story, or a skeleton of a story, a basic revenge story that there's not a lot of meat to what they're doing script-wise. Mm-hmm. All of the enjoyment of the film is purely from the creative aesthetic, yes, the visuals that the director brings to it, and sort of the odd take that he encourages his actors to bring to each of the characters that they're playing. So it's a very visual, visceral sort of an experience, yep, not a very cerebral experience.
Yeah. It's essentially an LSD trip
kind of
vengeance.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful love letter and then a straight up revenge flick kind of smashed into one. It's almost two different movies.
Yes.
And I think I sort of knew that going in. Mm-hmm. I will make one quick comparison. I think what you just said almost exactly describes Fury Road, which we both loved.
Right.
Thin screenplay, or I should say thin plot.
Yes.
It's just all about the visuals and the action and the fun. And this is more all about the visuals and the action and the fun and the dread and the drugs.
Yes.
And the horror.
Yeah.
And the grief and so I also we come out the same on a lot of movies. I think this is probably going to be similar. I liked it a lot. I didn't love it, but I definitely loved the visual element, the attention to detail in the visual element, the fact that different scenes in the movie were shot entirely different ways. Mm-hmm. Those title cards, man, that was so well done. Like I got chills on a couple that it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Mm-hmm. There's just so much visual goodness in this movie. And if you're like a film buff and you love movies and you love, and we love story, we love scripts, but we also have room in our bag for movies like this. And for me, I kind of expected it to be that. Yeah,
it definitely follows the suit that he laid out in Beyond the Black Rainbow.
Right. Yeah.
Very, very visual, and the story is conveyed through the visuals, but it's not so much a real. There's not a lot of storytelling to it. It's just sort of a series of beats that play out on the timeline of getting you from A to B.
Right. Pretty straight revenge story once that part of the movie starts.
Right.
So obviously we want to talk a lot more detail about this, and we're going to do that right about now. So the movie is in theaters right now. So if you haven't seen it yet and you want to see it, like I said, I suggest you going in and checking the time code for when the spoiler segment ends, and then maybe come back and checking it out. And just as a tip, it did just get released in theaters, but you can also rent it right now via iTunes and via Amazon. It's one of those that is available immediately for rent. So if you love visual filmmaking, I cannot recommend this movie enough. And if you like Nicolas Cage from way back in the day, you get some fun Nicolas Cage stuff, which we're going to get more into here.
My best advice is watch the trailer. If you watch the trailer and you're like, I don't know if this is for me, it's not for you. Right. If you watch the trailer and you're like, yeah, this is something torn right out of my mind and put on a movie screen, then watch this movie.
If you like 80s nostalgia, but not in the sort of antiseptic way of like Stranger Things and the more recent sort of 80s nostalgia. If you like, heavy metal and 80s fantasy novels and 80s artwork, that kind of thing, then you absolutely have to watch this movie. Unless you're squeamish. If you're squeamish, I would say skip it.
Yeah, I would say it's almost like a retro 80s feel.
Yeah.
Like, that sort of the visual style that's super popular right now that we're getting as a result of like the explosion of the synthwave musical genre mixed in with, you know, the success of things like Stranger Things and the Drive movie starring Ryan Gosling from a few years ago. This sort of taps into all of those and then just pulls it together and then, like you said, douses it heavily in LSD and just pumps it directly into your optic nerve.
Yeah, it's great. All right, so officially now we're getting into the more detailed, spoilery-ish stuff, so you've been warned. All right, so again, it's kind of two different movies. The first half is more about their time together, Mandy being the main character, and Nicolas Cage's character named Red. They live in like a secluded, I guess the best way I can describe it as some sort of a window cabin in the Pacific Northwest. Right. And they just basically spend their time hanging out, watching movies. He works as a lumberjack. Little foreshadowing at the beginning where he's got the chainsaw. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh boy, that's going to come in handy later. She is an artist and she wears a Motley Crue t-shirt, you know. So they just spend their time kind of doing their thing, happy to be away from the world. And so that that whole first half is really about, I don't want to say so much about her, but it's very beautifully shot. He uses a lot of different techniques and a lot of different scenes. And, you know, it tries to get to the emotional core of what they had together before it's summarily ripped away from them when she's murdered, which we'll get into. And then the whole second half of the movie, of course, is like Terrence said, it's like an LSD-fueled like revenge nightmare that's, I think, more satisfying than his previous movie, Beyond the Black Rainbow, because that one just had so much that was just left up to the viewer's interpretation, where this was just like, this is a revenge flick. Here's how it's going to go. He's going to murder everybody. Yes. It's going to be great. You know, it's got orgasmic violence and all that shit that you love about, you know, gore and revenge movies. And I really appreciated all that visual stuff. So I don't know where you want to start. We can start with Nicolas Cage's performance. We can start with just talking about the visual aspect. I mean, I just feel like we'll just bounce back and forth until we run out of stuff to talk about. Yeah.
So I just want to follow up from kind of how you laid out the outline of this film. The film is broken up, as most films are, into 3 acts. And he actually has title cards at the beginning of each of those 3 acts. And the font and the color that he uses for each of those title cards sort of conveys the experience that you're going to get as that piece of the film plays out. So as Chris was saying at the beginning, when he's just setting the tone for this and everything's sort of idyllic, the title card reflects that, and it gives you the sort of the chapter heading for the film, the year that it takes place, and it's a very soothing, cool blue tone. Mm-hmm. And then later when we're introduced to, you know, the villains, the bad guys against whom the revenge will take place, you get this much more sinister red title card to introduce that section of the film as it plays out. And then for the third act of the film, when revenge happens, that's when you get the Mandy title card. Mm-hmm. Of the film itself.
An hour into the movie.
Yes, an hour into the movie. And I mean, it is just gonzo. Like, you can just tell from that graphic that this movie is just about to go off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, the whole movie is visually stunning. I think the first shot that really just got me was the first time you see the van coming down the road.
Yes.
Red sky, tree lined on either side, where Mandy's walking, I think doing some chores on the property or something, and she gets that look on her face, and you can't see. I love when directors can build suspense by showing you someone's reaction but not showing you what they're looking at. Mm-hmm. He did a great job of that, and all she was looking at was a van approaching, but it inspired so much horror. It was just a van with its lights on, but the colors and the trees and the way the shot was set up, I thought was such an amazing shot.
Yeah, you can tell that's a turning point in the film.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole mood changes. That's when all the basically the rest of the movie is red. That's the best way to put it, I think. I mean,
yes,
the color,
one way or another,
everything is just saturated in red, figuratively and literally. So they did a lot of interesting things. They sort of played with the I guess existing cult leader archetype, with the cult leader being Jeremiah being a field musician, just like Charles Manson was. Mm-hmm. Those little, you know, band of miscreants in the van. The thing that I sort of was curious that Cosmatos never really explained was, they're a cult. They're almost like hippies, they until you see their darker side, but they're backed up by this murderous crew of heavy metal murder nightmare. I don't even know what to call them. They're like knights.
Yes.
They're the one guy looks like something from Hellraiser. They're not, and it's not just a costume. There's a scene in there when Nicolas Cage ends up killing one of them, where one of them is legitimately some kind of a creature under that mask, and there's really no explanation given for why the cult and that group was connected, why he is able to use it's almost like he's hiring them out, and the cost was that he just literally gave up one of his existing cult members, blood for blood. The guy literally says it.
Yeah.
I was just blown away by that, and so curious as to what that connection was. And I wanted to know, but I also didn't want him to waste time explaining it because it wasn't really important to the plot. Right.
And they do sort of explain it. I don't know that it's really worth going into at the moment while we're doing the review, but there are a couple of lines of dialogue to kind of thread together where those guys come from and how they're connected to the cult.
Oh, I must not have just picked up on that at all.
Yeah. I think the broader point that's worth discussing here is, as you can tell from the way Chris sort of described it, this movie has like a very heavy supernatural tone to it. A lot of the visuals, a lot of the bizarre activities that you see people do, lead you to believe that there is a supernatural element to this film. And I don't know that there really is. Like, I think the dialogue is driven in such a way to suggest that what you see that appears supernatural is actually, fueled in some way by various characters' drug use, and you're constantly being pulled into their point of view of these events.
Yeah, there's one of the cult members that he kills that he's wearing a mask, but his voice and the fact that he's just dripping with some sort of viscous fluid from his mouth, like, tries to lead you down the path of this being a supernatural element that wasn't. So I just found that super intriguing, and I love the either no explanation at all or the little explanation that was given that he just didn't hammer it home.
Right.
I love that. So another thing, you mentioned some of the dialogue. I got the feeling during this movie that the dialogue for some of the other characters, obviously in the script, I got the feeling maybe that none of Nicolas Cage's dialogue was scripted because it was so weird.
Yes.
There's a scene where he, when he's talking to Mandy early on in the movie, and the things he says are like seem completely out of context to the conversation. Maybe it's very Nick Cage. I don't know. There's a scene that I want to talk specifically about with Bill Duke later on in the movie where he just has the most bizarre response to what Bill Duke tells him. And it really made me think maybe there was dialogue on the page, but they just let Nick Cage do a bunch of stuff, and the director was like, okay, yeah, I can go with a little bit of this.
Right.
Did you get that impression at all?
Yeah, definitely did. Yeah.
Cage didn't really have a lot of dialogue. His performance is him emoting, basically.
Yeah. But there's also weird moments, too, with the cult leader who will just, like, pepper in a line or two that's like this weird joke that... There are slight moments of humor in the movie, and the movie is so dark and heavy that those moments don't work at all. But you appreciate that they at least made the effort to put them in, because they were like, man, we're taking
pretty
this
severe.
movie so under that we've got to try to filter some light into it somewhere, but it always kind of lands as a clunker. Some of the dialogue it's pretty bad.
The scene I think that a lot of people will remember for this movie will probably be Nicolas Cage in the bathroom. Was it the bathroom? Or no, it was like her creative room. No, it was the bathroom because he was on the toilet.
Yes.
Maybe a creative room for some people. Anyway, he after his wife is killed brutally in front of him, he just goes in there after he survives the attack, and he just breaks down. And clearly, Panos Cosmatos locked the camera down and said, all right, Nick, do your thing. And I believe it was about a 4 or 5 minute uninterrupted shot of Nicolas Cage just completely falling apart, which I think was meant to be taken completely seriously. But I think one of the issues that Cosmatos really maybe should have counted on is that it's Nicolas Cage. So he's going to do Nicolas Cage things. And I'm sure a lot of audience members probably were laughing during that scene a bit inappropriately.
Yes. But I mean, again, I'm not entirely certain that he didn't want it to be just outrageous to the point that it was kind of funny.
Yeah, possible.
I'm not really sure.
I don't either, and I guess that's a sign of good filmmaking. I'm not sure. I mean,
Yeah.
But you sort of roll the dice when you bring Nicolas Cage on, I guess, because you're going to have to understand that he's going to do what he's going to do, even though he's the guy who's getting paid to do a job. Interesting thing I read about this movie is that apparently they approached Nicolas Cage to be in the movie, but not to play Red, instead to play Jeremiah.
Oh.
And Nicolas Cage read the script and said, "This is great, but I have to be the lead in this movie. I love the lead role." And so it didn't have this detail in the article I read, but my assumption then becomes that Cosmatos weighed having a big name recognizable star, not really in the role he had in mind for, but the fact that he would be able to get him, that it would, it might gain some more notoriety for the film, put it in the spotlight, which it exactly did. So I think it was clearly the right choice.
Right.
And Nick Cage was very Nick Cage, but he had minimal dialogue, which whether or not that was a choice made by Cosmatos, I don't know, but I think he did fine. I've seen people throw out the whole like Oscar-worthy performance. I don't know about all that.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, but for the kind of movie it was, and for what Nick Cage did, I thought he did a fine job. What did you think of his performance?
I would agree. I think he was great in the role that he was given. I think it's interesting to note that he's clearly the lead, but I would say he's probably number 3 in screen time in the film. I think the cult leader by far has the most screen time. Then his wife has the second, and then there are long stretches of that film where Nicolas Cage doesn't even show up.
Yeah, and some of the stuff they did with Mandy and the cult leader. There's that scene where I think that everyone will also remember, where it's just a close-up shot of Jeremiah, the cult leader's face, talking to camera, again uninterrupted, and they're cross-fading with Mandy's face. And man, I just feel like that on a big screen, looks amazing. I thought it was really effective to set a mood.
Yes.
And it really, it was a pretty simple effect.
Absolutely.
There was no multi-million-dollar special effect going on there.
Yeah.
That's about as old school as it gets, a crossfade. And man, that was really effective.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, to take a step back for a moment, we should just set the stage for people who haven't seen this movie, like how visual this movie is. Like, I mean, there's entire sequences where everything is monochromatic. Like the screen is nothing but red, or the screen is nothing but blue. There's a lot of strobe light effects. There are animated sequences, like fully animated sequences built into it. There's one moment kind of early on in the film where you fade from this really idyllic, cool toned scene of Nicolas Cage and Mandy on a boat floating in the middle of a lake to a shot of them, a close-up of the campfire that evening that they're sitting around on this camping trip. But the fade isn't directly from the rowboat shot to the campfire. Instead, it fades from this cool-toned boat scene to the screen full of flames, just an inferno burning up. Yep. And then it fades from that to this close-up of the campfire. And of course, this pays off later on in the film, but it's tons of just subtle little visual cues peppered throughout that film that most people probably might not even notice. And when you do notice it, you're just like, whoa, I wonder what this is about. And then as the movie plays out, there's more and more payoff for them. I mean, again, just visually, the movie is next level for sure. For sure, yeah. That shot of the fire, I noticed as well. Thought that was super effective. And I think if you look, when they first show the screen fully engulfed in flames, it's I forget the name of the effect for it, but it's two sides that are mirroring each other. Yes. Some kind of a mirror effect here, and then goes into the actual shot of the flame. And just since we're talking, we're not worrying about spoilers here. I mean, I don't know if you want to continue to set the stage before we get to actually what happens with his wife. But it's a revenge movie, so you know what's coming. Yeah. I think we can just dive right into that. Yeah, so she dies by fire. Yes. Although, I will say this, because I always make sure to note this, even though it's not really relevant to this movie, but she dies off screen,
which is because she actually they string her up in front of Red. She's covered in a bag, and they light her on fire. That's how she goes out. But you never actually see her dying. Yeah. She's in that bag. So
you never even see her put in the bag, do you?
Yeah, no, you never see. They come out of the house with her in the bag, slumped over the shoulder. So. Of course, when that sort of thing happens, it always makes me think, wait a minute, is she actually dead? Is there something else that's going to happen later in this movie? And I was really hoping that wouldn't be the case, and it wasn't, thankfully. So he, one of the famous images you're going to see from this movie is the one where Nick Cage, as Red, has his hands bound above his head. He's got a piece of barbed wire as a gag over his mouth, and he's watching his, wife be burned to death right in front of him. You see the light in his eyes reflecting from the flames, and I think at some point too, they actually show the moment when the flames go down. You see the light actually go out of his eyes. So there's some cool symbolic story stuff there too. And
tons of symbolism in this movie.
Yeah. Gets stabbed under the rib while he's got his hands bound above him.
Yeah, so you see his hand nailed, Christ-like. You see, as Chris was saying, he's bound in barbed wire, both around his mouth and around his wrists, which looks a lot like a crown of thorns. Like you said, he gets stabbed in the side the same way Jesus was by the Roman guard.
Yep.
I mean, it's a lot of symbolism there.
Yeah, he's wearing the tiger on his shirt, and later on, they literally release a caged tiger.
Yes.
Some of it wasn't too subtle. But anyway, I mean, I guess just to go over some of the highlights of the movie, I can't remember. Maybe this has happened before in one of those Evil Dead movies, but a chainsaw fight.
I'm sure we've seen it before, but I can't pull from my memory an example.
Yeah, so that was something a little bit different. I love, and again, absent of context, because the guy's a lumberjack. The fact that they just have Nick Cage smelting a weapon.
Yes.
He
creates his own crazy ass World of Warcraft medieval axe.
Yeah, I was going to say Klingon, a Klingon could see that and want a piece of that for sure. Creating that himself, it just, man, it's crazy. So in his preparation to take his vengeance, there's one scene that I want to bring up that just was sort of off-putting because of how different it was. Because this whole movie, like Terrence said, it's just everything is visual. The whole movie is just a visual this, visual that. There's not a lot of exposition dialogue. There's not a lot of dialogue, period, unless it's like you said, like the cult leader Jeremiah. But there's a scene where Nick Cage, in preparation for taking his vengeance, goes and he visits his friend, who's played by Bill Duke. If you don't recognize his name, you've seen him in a million movies. I think for me, most famously, he's the guy in Predator who gets the little 3 dots on his head while he's trying to hide from the predator and gets his head exploded. And then Jesse Ventura is out there, mowing down the jungle because he's lost his buddy.
Right.
That's Bill Duke. At the time, in the 80s, when a big, muscular black guy, completely bald. So in this movie, he's obviously much older, and Nick Cage goes to talk to him to get his crossbow.
Yes.
But that's the only scene in the movie that just felt like a normal movie scene.
Right.
It's lit normally.
Yep.
There's nothing visually crazy going on. They're actually having a conversation.
Yeah, it's the moment where the screenwriter was like, here's where we explain what's going on.
Right, which wasn't necessary at all. I mean,
no.
I mean, we know what's going to happen.
It's from that conversation, though, that we kind of get some sense of what you were talking about earlier about, what's the connection between this hell biker gang to this band of hippies or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. He warns them about them and literally tells them, you got to realize you're probably going to die.
Yeah. And it's in that sequence where he explains that they were couriers for a drug dealer who got some sort of crazy bad batch of LSD and it fried their brains.
So there was one coherent dialogue scene in that movie where they actually explained something going on in the movie, and it completely went over my head.
Yeah, and you couldn't follow it.
That is amazing. Yeah, it kind of reminded me of the motorcycle, the villain in Raising Arizona a little bit. Dude,
multiple times while watching this movie, there were moments where I was reminded of Raising Arizona.
Yeah, strange thing. You can kind of see his, you can see Cosmatos' influences coming out a little bit there, but it really is a movie like no other. So anyway, he gets his crossbow from his buddy, goes out to take his vengeance. basically tracks them down one by one. He starts with, I think he started with the motorcycle rider guys. I'm sure they have a name. I don't remember what it was. But he takes them out and eventually works his way towards the cult and the cult leader. And I mean, it's explosive and super violent, as you would expect. He uses his full range of weapons. It's just, if you like revenge movies, and then it's a very satisfying ending if you're into that kind of thing.
Yes, revenge is had.
Yes, it's had to an extreme level. So, I mean, I feel like we could continue on about this for quite a long time, but it just doesn't disappoint. If you're a fan of the revenge genre, then it really does not disappoint at all. And I would recommend seeing it on the big screen, but if you're not able, because it probably is not going to be in theaters very long, then definitely check it out. It's, like I said, it's available to rent.
And if you love symbolism, I mean, there's a lot to chew on this movie. I mean, There's a lot of numerical references, tons of visual stuff, lots of comparisons to various religious and
yeah.
I mean, it's chock full of that stuff. I'm kind of looking forward to a couple months down the road going online and just reading some of the breakdowns of this film that people have written up, because I just think I think we will be amazed at how much thought and planning went into what we were going to be shown and how we were going to be shown it.
Sure, yeah. And I guess I also just wanted to bring up, there's the scene where, so the I don't know, the night riders, those guys, the creepy guys on the motorcycles, they're fueled by whatever drug they're fueled by, but they have it in like literally a mason jar that they just chug before they go out on one of their missions. So when Nick Cage kills one of them, he finds the mysterious jug of drug glop and literally just, I think, sticks his finger in it and touches his tongue to it. And that's just such an explosive scene where Panos Cosmatos just gets to do whatever the hell he wants to. And that he was just so looking forward to when he would shoot whatever was going to happen when Nick Cage goes on this crazy LSD trip, because it's just like this total, like we keep mentioning LSD, this just complete explosion of visuals and horrific things that are jarring and scary and frightening. And I just thought that was great, because I could feel watching it. I could feel how excited that director was to shoot that stuff. And
I want to drive home too that as we're describing it, some of this sounds very pedestrian, biker gangs and LSD, and it's not like it's so steeped in this supernatural aura and the visual storytelling that what we're telling you is like the most literal interpretation of the events that happened in the film.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you that is not what the filmmakers wanted. They want you to think on this, and everything is a symbol for something else. And this film is just layers and layers deep.
Yeah. I can promise you've never seen anything like this movie.
Oh no, probably not. No.
And for me, that right there, I'm going to see it. Like, even if it ends and of course I like this movie, but even if it ends up being bad, something that looks like I've never seen it before, like a totally new take or a new style, I'm all about that. I'm going to see it. I guess as we're sort of wrapping up our discussion on it, one kind of interesting piece of trivia: Beyond the Black Rainbow took place in 1983. Mandy took place in 1983 as well.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So he is very tied to that time period. So I'm actually not going anywhere with that.
Oh.
I'm just mentioning that.
I thought you were saying we were going to get a crossover.
Oh, I did not even think about that. But yeah, maybe that's in his long-term plans. I mean, I guess before we wrap it up on Mandy, it's hard for me to pinpoint really who some of his influences are, because some of them are so similar. Like there's a lot of people drew connections to Cronenberg from Beyond the Black Rainbow. Obviously, a lot of David Lynch inspiration.
Very
there.
heavy David Lynch.
Heavy Lynch. And then probably a lot of stuff that we aren't as familiar with because we're not super big horror fans.
Yeah.
So stuff like, Phantasm and, like I mentioned, Hellraiser and those kind of movies, which I don't think I've ever actually seen either of the originals of those two.
Right.
So, but clearly, like I said, this one, all the visual stuff from those 80s fantasy novels that they refer to, and they did so. I have to go back to actually the end of the movie, but they did it several other times too, where they just show the landscape and the background, where they they take what is just a normal existence, quote unquote existence, in the Pacific Northwest where this movie took place, and they turn the landscape into something that you would see in one of those 80s, fantasy novels, something that you would see in your head, or that artwork from the time, from like the novel covers from that time.
Yeah. I mean, so many great just visual moments, visual cues in this film. For me, as long as we're just throwing this out, the standout visual comes toward the near the end of the film, where we get to the cults. They've built a temple in the mountains, and there's this awesome tracking shot where the camera is on tracks moving forward. It starts at the top of the temple and pans down as the camera is moving forward and slowly enters into the temple. It's just a beautiful, gorgeous shot. It's an amazing shot.
Yeah, and it does not end well for that temple. So, yeah, I think we've given you plenty there to go on. I just, again, this movie is one that you have to see to believe. It's pretty damn near indescribable because words can't do the visuals justice. So just check it out, especially if you are a film fan, an indie movie fan, someone who appreciates the visual aesthetic. I mean, it is extremely artistic.
And I think when we come back, we'll just wrap this episode up because we've been talking a lot.
A long time. That's all we have for this week. We will do this again next week. I can already tell you next week's show, there will also be some revenge content because I'm going to talk about the 2017 French film called Revenge that has some of the similar themes of this movie that we just talked about, Mandy, but is entirely different. So that's coming up next week. Appreciate you guys listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Hope you guys love revenge.
All right. Thanks, guys, for listening. We'll see you next time.